Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
Croissants, fine wine, hoops. For the second year in a row, the number one overall pick in the NBA draft is a French player. There are a bunch more draft storylines to know, including Donovan Clingan falling, and the Nets may have made the best rebuilding trade ever.
I'm Peter Bukowski, starting your day with the can't-miss stories and biggest debates in sports. You're Locked On Sports Today.
Searching all major sports. Found.
Let's start with the biggest story.
The Atlanta Hawks made French forward Zachary Richache the number one overall pick. Locked On host Brad Rowland broke down the selection with Locked On's Tanitra Batiste.
The Atlanta Hawks have made a selection in the 2024 NBA draft. I'm Tanitra Batiste, and we are joined by Brad Rowland. The Hawks have made their selection in the 2024 NBA draft. And Brad from Locked On Hawks is here to break down the Hawks selecting Zachary Richache with the number one pick, presented by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. So Brad, not a big shocker there as far as going with Richache, but what was your reaction in terms of the Hawks going in that direction versus maybe going with Alex Sarr?
Like you said, not a big shock, especially after the last couple of days seemed to center on Richache. And look, the entire time, this has been a wide open situation where in most drafts, it's kind of clear who's going to go number one. And this is not one of those drafts, as we talked about many times in the last couple of months. But in the end, it seems like the Hawks went with the, I'm not going to say a safe option, but kind of what the league is doing right now, which is these wings who can shoot and defend. Maybe not a ton of star power, but a guy that they can kind of be trusting and relying upon and kind of modeling after what the rest of the league is doing. And honestly, trying to match teams like the Celtics, who are led by those big-time wings.
Indeed. Now, how does going with that wing, that guy that gives them 3-and-D, give you some insight into maybe what the Hawks might do as far as building around or even moving on from Trae Young?
Yeah, that's the big question now. Like, once this pick is made, and it's been made, and that was the big drama, they have other work to do. They have decisions to make in the backcourt in particular. I do think the Richache is not going to be necessarily like a number one option, so he does fit well with their guys they already have, including Trae Young. But it's not a secret. The Hawks have this kind of decision to make in the backcourt that most people don't believe that those guys, Trae Young and DeJounte Murray, are going to be and should be linked together for the long term. So that choice is going to be big. I do think that he fits well with Trae Young in particular as a guy who could set him up. But certainly the attention now shifts. Once this pick is over, it was always going to be domino number two was the backcourt.
Indeed. Domino number two has been the backcourt. But, Brad, you could make an argument for maybe the front court and some challenges that they're having, especially at the 5 position, if you will. So when you look at now this domino has fallen, and now it's really time to get into what the Hawks are going to do with free agency. How does going with a Richache for the number one draft pick kind of impact what they're going to do, in your opinion, in free agency?
I think it gives them flexibility because the hardest thing to find is these two-way wings. And look, no one's talked about it yet as to why they did this, but I'm pretty confident Landry Fields is going to say something to that effect where everyone wants these two-way wings. And basically, because you have to spend such a high price, look, Mikal Bridges got traded for 5 first-round picks just a day ago. And while he may not be Mikal Bridges, that's kind of tell you what those guys go for in free agency and go for in trade. So they're definitely going to be important to see what happens next. And I think the center spot's one to keep an eye on for sure. Capella and Kongwu has been that pairing for a long while, and they might break up them too. But in the end, they didn't pick a center, and that leaves more flexibility in that position right now because they could still keep them both if they have to.
Yeah, and one more question before we wrap up. Just going back to Landry Fields had already kind of tipped his hand real quick to last week saying, hey, we're going to pretty much stick with that number one pick. Were you good with them sticking with the number one pick in terms of the future?
Yeah, I think if they had traded back, it wouldn't have been a big surprise to me. I would have been okay with it. But in the end, the most likely thing in any single pick is to stay there and make the pick, especially number one overall. There are not a ton of teams that have traded that pick away. So it's anything but a surprise. I'm not surprised by it. And they got their guy. In the end, that's the one thing that you can do at number one overall is pick whoever you want. And in the end, they chose that to be Richache. So they're obviously comfortable with it. And that's where we're going long term.
Indeed. For more on the Hawks, subscribe to Locked On Hawks on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And for more on Zachary Risachet, let's get an inside look on his path to the NBA.
This is Richard Saman from the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast, talking about Zachary Risachet, the wing from France. He is a very interesting prospect at 6'8", only a 6'9.5" wingspan. No, it's actually pretty big, but for a wing, you want to have somebody with a lot longer than their body of a wingspan, generally 7 foot plus, approaching that. Not quite there. It's kind of a red flag for him, but his dad played basketball in Spain, so he comes from a basketball family. He's a really good shooter, and he's a very good defender. Everything else kind of in between is a little bit tough to come across. Reminds you a little bit of how he's at the top of the draft, the way Jabari Smith was at the top of the draft just 2 years ago, compared to some creators and some bigs. You know, the same way that Jabari Smith was at the top. He's not a bad comp. A little bit of different players, but that 3-and-D mold with some area to fill in is going to intrigue some teams at the top. And because of that, Risachet is actually one of the safer players. And if you're looking for a player that can be 3-and-D right away, start, but not really grow too much into star mold, Zachary Risachet is your guy.
Stay up to date all year on the Atlanta Hawks by subscribing to Locked On Sports today and Locked On Hawks on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Thanks for making Locked On Sports today your first listen. Coming up, the first round of the NBA draft had plenty of surprises. Game Time makes getting to the ballpark even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. They're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event and even an hour after it starts. It's the place to find last-minute seats. Find exclusive flash deals and sponsored deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. And the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section in row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the free app and new users can get $20 off their first purchase with code Locked On. Terms apply. That's code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase with Game Time. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, the lowest price guaranteed. If you're catching this episode after hearing your favorite Locked On show, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Sports today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Donovan Clingan was being talked about as a top 3 pick before Wednesday. He ended up falling to the Blazers at number 7.
Yeah, I mean he's gigantic. He measured. He measured over 7'1" in shoes. I believe he had a 9'7" standing reach at the combine. Like he's just a giant person. I am personally a little concerned about what he does on offense. I think of his lack of shooting range and sort of how he can score outside of direct post-ups. And I don't even think he's going to be a direct post-up guy. It might limit him a little bit, but he's going to defend the rim. He's going to be a guy who plays mostly in drop coverage and is gigantic around the basket. It's still the most valuable thing in the NBA is to prevent teams from getting layups. And he will be able to do that at probably a relatively high level. And we'll see how early he can get to that relatively high level. But the defensive upside is there. The passing, he has some passing chops that I think are really intriguing. And if he becomes even a somewhat of a positive in other aspects of his on offense, I think he's going to be a really good player.
There was a UConn player selected in the top 5. The Spurs took Stefan Castle at number 4. Locked On UConn host Mark Zanetto breaks down what Victor Wembanyama can expect from his new teammate.
Stefan Castle from the 2-time defending national champion UConn Huskies. Hi, I'm Mark Zanetto from Locked On UConn. At 6'6", 200 pounds, Stefan Castle is recognized as a lockdown defender with a phenomenal change of direction, that of a point guard who's been a veteran for 10 years. Stefan Castle is the ultimate teammate. He can go get you 20 points and 10 rebounds or sacrifice his own scoring to get his teammates great scoring opportunities. His current comps in the league, I would consider more of a Drew Holiday type. While that is an incredible comp, I would also look at his ceiling. Could that be of a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander? So yes, an MVP type player. Stefan Castle will have an immediate impact in the NBA. He already has an NBA body, the poise of a veteran, and you can win with him right away. For more on Stefan Castle and all things UConn, follow and subscribe to Locked On UConn on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
The Spurs then added Kentucky guard Rob Dillingham with the 8th pick before trading him to Minnesota.
Rob Dillingham from the Kentucky Wildcats just may be the best ball handler in this year's draft class. Hi, my name is Lance Dahl, host of the Locked On Kentucky podcast, and Dillingham was incredible for the Wildcats coming off the bench a season ago, averaging over 15 points per game while shooting 44% from beyond the arc in just 23 minutes per contest. He was electric, especially in the clutch. Dillingham, I think, would be best served playing point guard, starting point guard for whichever NBA team ends up selecting him. I liken him to a player like Kobe White or maybe even Kemba Walker, just with his confidence, his size at the point guard position, his explosiveness, and of course, his ability to handle the basketball. For more on Dillingham and Kentucky basketball, you can subscribe to the Locked On Kentucky podcast on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
The Hornets picked the 3rd Frenchman in the top 6.
Tjon Salon played at Cholet Basket in France and is a hot topic in draft circles, and deservedly so, as he might have the most potential in the NBA draft. I'm Leif Tulin of the Locked On NBA Big Board, and here's what's to know about Tjon. He's a 6'9", 205-pound wing who's only 18 years old and has played his best basketball late into the season and into the playoffs, leading Cholet to an upset quarterfinal win, hitting big shot after big shot to score 19 points in a playoff game. He averaged 10 points and 4 boards on the season, but just one look at the film and you're quickly convinced of his ability to translate to and eventually thrive in the modern NBA because he's huge, plays with tremendous hustle, and his shot inspires faith despite decent shooting numbers. Another thing I love about Salon is he does not shy away from the moment, as many youngsters and growing shooters do, and he can pair that with the athletic traits that bode well for defensive rebounding as he matures. For more on Tjon Salon, listen to Locked On NBA Big Board on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
And one of the big surprises of the night, the Grizzlies took Zack Edey at 9.
Purdue's Zack Edey was college basketball's most dominant player the last 2 years. I'm Craig Sheeman for Locked On Big Ten. Zack Edey is a legitimate 7'4", a sturdy 300 pounds, and he's got a wingspan of 7 feet 11 inches. He averaged 25 points, 12 rebounds, and 2 blocks per game for the Boilermakers this year, and he's the 2-time National Player of the Year. His numbers coming out of college are comparable to Shaq's at LSU. But his game is more like Yao Ming's. If this draft were 20 years ago, this kid would be the number 1 pick. There's no question about it. But today's NBA game is full of shooters of all sizes on the perimeter. The one thing Zack Edey struggles with is shooting on the perimeter. In fact, he made just 1 3-pointer in his entire college career, and that was this year against Indiana, and he banked it in garbage time. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to be as curious as anybody to see how he's used in the NBA. But I clearly think there's a place for him if he goes to the right team. For more on Zack Edey and all things Big Ten, follow and subscribe to Locked On Big Ten on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
The number 1 overall pick hails from France. Moments after Richard's selection, another French player heard his name called as the Wizards took forward Alex Sarr.
The Washington Wizards have made a selection in the 2024 draft. I'm Tanitra Batiste, and we are joined by Brandon Scott from Locked On Wizards to break down the Wizards selecting Alex Sarr with the number 2 pick, presented by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. So, Brandon, in the last couple of days, there was this back and forth of whether or not Zachary Richardson was going to go number 1 or Alex Sarr. Ultimately, Richardson goes 1, Sarr goes 2. Were you surprised that he was there at number 2 and that the Wizards decided to go with him?
I'm not surprised, but I am, if that makes sense, because there's going to be a lot of smoke and mirrors this time of the year with the draft, free agency, and the trade market. So I know that with the Hawks held all the cards, so I was kind of expecting anything. But Alex Sarr, when he made it known that he wanted to come to DC, he liked what was going on in DC, kind of gave an indicator that it was going to be the pick of 2. And I'm very excited because his age, his intangibles, very excited with this pick.
Yeah, I think that he's an interesting one because he's one of those guys, to your point, where he could potentially fit into this Wizards front court early and kind of make a splash. So where do you see him kind of being able to fit in because of the skills that he brings to the table to make an immediate impact?
I think that would have to the kind of answer that would rely on future moves because right now Kyle Kuzma is the starting power forward, and you saw that Denny Avdia was sent out of town for the 14th pick, so they're trying to clear a lot of cap room and send a lot of these veterans off the roster and start a youth movement because we're still early on in the rebuild status. And Alex Sarr, he's 19, so he fits the timeline long term, but youth movement, because if other factors look at Brian Keefe was the head coach. So, he's a developmental coach, him and David Vanderpool, the top assistant. So right now, development is the name of the game. So but Alex Sarr is going to do well. I mean, where he projects, again, kind of depends on what direction he go with Kyle Kuzma. If they trade Kyle Kuzma, he definitely slots in at the 4 because he's a 7'1", but he definitely prefers the 4, which I think is very intriguing. So if we move Kyle Kuzma, I definitely see him being our next starting power forward.
And what do you like the most about Sarr? Because he's one of those guys, to your point, that brings some things to the table, but kind of want to know if you feel like it's more of a ceiling for him, like he's a high ceiling, high floor. What do you feel is his upside?
I think the biggest thing about him that I like is versatility. I mean, if you look at the Washington Wizards, we have a lot of guys who are versatile. Bilal Coulibaly, he can play the 2, the 3, the 4. He can guard all 5. Versatility is the name of the game. 7'1", probably 20 years ago, 15 years ago, you would say he'd be a center. But now, you're a lot more versatile players now. He can play the 4, he can play the 5. His shot will develop. His shot is definitely something that's very raw in the process, but his shot's there. But he checks all the boxes: interior defense, interior offense, rebounding. I mean, he just fits so many boxes for the Wizards.
Yeah, and more importantly, and maybe most importantly, Brandon, like you said, he's excited to go to the district and be able to make some impact with this Washington Wizards team. For more on the Wizards, subscribe to Locked On Wizards on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And for more on Sarr, let's get an inside look on his path to the NBA.
Alex Sarr is a 7'1" modern NBA big hailing from France. Many people believe Sarr's athleticism combined with his offensive potential position him to be a top 2 pick in this year's draft. I am James Barlow from the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast. Alex Sarr has the potential to play either the power forward or the center position. The 19-year-old last played for the Perth Wildcats of the NBL in Australia, where he averaged 9.6 points, 4.5 rebounds, and 1.5 blocks per game in just 18 minutes per contest. Prior to the NBL, he helped France win the bronze at the 2022 FIBA Under-17 World Cup, and then silver at the 2023 FIBA Under-19 World Cup. His current NBA player comp is Evan Mobley. Alex Sarr is expected to have an immediate impact on an NBA roster. For more on Alex Sarr and all things NBA related, follow and subscribe to the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
Coming up, the Nets absolutely nailed this whole rebuild thing. In one trade, the Brooklyn Nets completely reset their future. As Locked On Nets host Doug Norrie tells his co-host Adam Armbrecht, even though this was such a shocking trade.
This is crazy, man. This is crazy. This is in one fell swoop, Marks. They reset the entire organization. We'll see how it goes. We'll have days and days to go into like what this means for the organization, what this means long term, what this means for Brooklyn on like a player level, what it means on a pick level, and how in just, in the span of basically 15 minutes, the Nets reset their entire organization to go into full draft, full tank, reset the deck, end of the superstar era, cutting ties with basically everything that was associated with that, moving on from a guy that they said was going to be the guy that they went into the future with, Mikal Bridges. And we're going to go through, all the stuff that happened here, but just on a high level, it's not often, and we're close to these situations because we talk about these guys every day. It's not often, honestly, that gets something like to shoot me out of bed. Oh my God, I can't believe this just happened, because that is how shocking this is.
It's a good reminder too. This doesn't have to be a full teardown for years and years and years. When you get a bunch of draft capital, you now have the option at any moment, a star can become unhappy. We see it happen every year, usually multiple times a year. Doesn't mean a superstar is going to get traded, but Brooklyn is an appealing location, even if the franchise is not the most storied. Certainly the little brother in New York City to the Knicks. But you're always in position if you have extra draft capital and you are in a desirable place. The other piece of this is if you're going to tank, it's the 2025 draft. That's the class to do it in. And so that's what made the Rockets trade so essential. They had to make sure that they had their picks to make this all work. 2025 is a killer draft. 2024 kind of stinks. So if you're going to set yourself up to tank, do it in a year where there is real gems to be tanked for. And when you're also getting all sorts of capital that sets you up for the next thing, because who knows? Trae Young could be a Brooklyn net target if Trae Young does not want to be in Atlanta anymore. Or there could be a surprise, a guy we don't even know about, all of a sudden says, I want to go to Brooklyn. They have set themselves up to have the resources to go do it. And finally, outside of NBA draft news, Shohei Ohtani was about his record-setting shenanigans again. He hit a leadoff homer in Chicago against the White Sox on Wednesday. With that dinger, Ohtani set the all-time Dodgers record with an RBI in 10 straight games. How many records will he end his career with? I'm not great with math, but I think the number is going to be high. Very, very high. If you're catching this episode after hearing your favorite Locked On show, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Also, if you're a new subscriber to Locked On Sports Today, we're here for you with the biggest stories in sports every day. Coming up on the next Locked On Sports Today, what hijinks can we expect from day 2 of the NBA draft? So at least until tomorrow, stay locked on sports today.
Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
For more episodes of Locked On Sports Today, go to our video on demand. Click on sports at the top of your screen. There, you'll find past episodes of Locked On Sports Today, plus other Locked On shows on demand.